Hello, ladies and gentlemen, such a pleasure for you to join me. The first question that you probably have is, Alex, why are you seemingly stuck in Cyberpunk 2077? And I will answer that question throughout this lecture, because there is a reason. But for now, put it in the back of your mind and simply enjoy the new cosmetic look of Smurf Alex, or Avatar Alex, or Draenei Alex. I could go on listing blue things forever. But yeah, there is a reason for it. Now, the target audience for this lecture is as follows. I recommend that you stop and watch this if you are in the blue ocean. Blue ocean thinkers, if you know what the blue ocean is and you're in it, you should watch this. Very niche audience there. I'd say it's neutral, you can stay if you want to, go if you want to, if you're in the red ocean, right? So you know what being in the red ocean is, and you're in it, which is arguably an even rarer group of people. And I would say that you should avoid this and go if you are uneducated in oceanic thought, right? If you hear the terms blue ocean, red ocean, and you're thinking, what is this, some sort of aquamarine discussion, I'm afraid you're going to be very disappointed. If you don't know what that means, you should probably go and learn about that. You could probably still understand what I'm talking about without it, but I wouldn't recommend it. So really, this is really for blue ocean thinkers, right? And, on that front, the Blue Ocean foundation that this builds upon is pragmatism over emotion. I always say that these are usually very controversial, but in this case, I don't think that will be true, because considering I'm targeting Blue Ocean thinkers exclusively here, it's sort of like preaching to the choir almost. I don't think it'll be that controversial at all. But what are we talking about? Well, as you can probably tell, the title of this lecture is Surviving the Hivemind of Red Ocean Fanatics. Now, the problem with that is, I imagine that most people who are in the blue ocean sort of understand what that title means in a subconscious way, right? I mean, you have to, in order to have clicked to this in the first place, you had to have had some sort of bond with that title and gone, yeah, intriguing, let's find out more. But this is one of those lectures where, usually at the beginning I do a little intro about what it is that we're about to talk about. I can't really do that here. Instead, all I can really do is say, what we're going to do is we should ask ourselves 5 questions. Who, what, why, where, and how. And after we have asked and then answered these 5 questions, what it means to survive the hive mind of Red Ocean Fanatics will become very clear, right? So, in other words, we're going to have to explain as we go along. So I guess the first question to ask would be the rather obvious one of, who are Red Ocean Fanatics? Right, it's a pretty good way to start. So let's start off with number 1, thinkers versus fanatics. Okay, so of course you have the Red Ocean and you have the Blue Ocean. And the Red Ocean are those who still believe that 20th century ideologies can fix our problems today, right? So socialists, progressives, neoliberals, libertarians, conservatives, people who exclusively believe in these ideologies. And, they're dedicated to, they believe that if only everyone else could see what they saw in these ideologies, then the world would be a much better place. Whereas, of course, the Blue Ocean is those who believe that 21st century problems require 21st century solutions, right? So people who look at the current ideologies and say, no, these aren't good enough. We need to have some new ideas or syncretic mixes of these ideas, sort of blend them together. In other words, everything that people are trying to do today is from the past. It isn't working, and we need to do better. Now, of course, there's much more to the Red Ocean and the Blue Ocean than that, but for brevity's sake, I thought I would give a brief description. The problem is, however, is that when you get in the Blue Ocean, when you become a Blue Ocean thinker, it's very easy to look at people in the Red Ocean who are obviously going to be a majority, much more people than you, much more loud than you as well, right? Collectively, at least. And it's very easy when you're in the Blue Ocean to look at people in the Red Ocean and go, man, what a bunch of idiots, right? What a bunch of fools, or even evil, right? That tends to be like the common sentiment that people in the Blue Ocean have about people in the Red Ocean: foolishness or a lack of morals. But I think this is forgivable when you first get in the Blue Ocean, right? Like when you're first in there for a while, because you inevitably get this feeling of like, almost like you've progressed, like you've evolved, and you feel very proud of that evolution. And then you look down on the people who haven't done the same thing, right? I think that's normal. But I have to say, I also don't think it's fair to tar everyone in the red ocean with the same brush. Because from what I've seen, really there are two types of people in the red ocean. And the first type is what I call the red ocean thinker. And the red ocean thinker, they're capable of blue ocean thoughts, but simply haven't got there yet. Usually young and or politically inexperienced. And all blue ocean thinkers were once red ocean thinkers, right? So the key word here is thinker, right? These are people who, yes, they're in the red ocean. They ascribe to these old, out-of-date ideologies that are never going to get us anywhere in the 21st century because, 21st century problems require 21st century solutions, of course. So they're still believing in all this old ideological drivel exclusively. But they are thinkers, right? These are not closed-minded people. They're open-minded. And the only real problem with red ocean thinkers is that they haven't yet been introduced to blue ocean thought, and they haven't been sufficiently convinced of it, right? So these people are not closed-minded. They're not, they're very innocent people. As I said, it's kind of like they're on a journey, and they haven't quite reached the same destination as you in the blue ocean. But given enough time, given enough moving through the jungle, per se, they would inevitably reach the same conclusions, right? So I often feel quite sorry for red ocean thinkers because people in the blue ocean, again, they have this sort of elitism and look down on these people because they're in the red ocean, and they go like, oh, fools, evil, as I said earlier. But actually, it's more the fact that they're just catching up, and these aren't bad people. These aren't horrible people. They're just people who they're on a journey and they haven't quite reached their destination yet, and you're a little bit ahead of them, right? And I actually think that with red ocean thinkers, you have to be respectful and put your hand out and say, hey, if you can relate to whatever ideology they believed in, I was like you. Here's what changed my mind, and let me introduce you to blue ocean thinking, right? That's kind of like what you've got to do with red ocean thinkers. But then you have the other side of the coin. And these are what I call, of course, Red Ocean Fanatics. And Red Ocean Fanatics are completely different than Red Ocean Thinkers. Because what Red Ocean Fanatics do is they're incapable of blue ocean thoughts. They refuse to be reasoned with. They never perceive the world outside of their ideology of choice. And they pose significant problems to society at large. The Red Ocean Thinkers are thinkers, right? Now, they might not think very good ideas, they might not have reached the destination yet, but they're still capable of thought. Fanatics are not capable of thought in this way. Well, of course, they are capable of thought. I mean, they're a human being. But they've sort of been trained in a way. They've mentally trained themselves or have been trained to think that certain thoughts are almost like an invasion. Like, it's wrong think. No, that's bad. You can't. If it disagrees with the ideology, eliminate it from the mind immediately. It's almost like a computer. If it doesn't get the exact right code that it expects, it will not perform the executed action. That's what the fanatics are like. And it's almost like they've put a prison over their own mind, right? And they're not letting anything new in. And they're extremely hostile. And they think that they have the answers to everything. And it's these people who give everyone in the red ocean a bad name. But it's also these people who are the loudest people in the red ocean, right? And so if you're in the blue ocean and you think, God, if only people could just abandon these out-of-date 20th century and older ideologies, we could progress as a species. You see these people, you're much more likely to see these people with the megaphones yelling the red ocean ideologies. And so it sort of warps your mind into making you think that everyone in the red ocean, even the thinkers, are all fanatics, and they're not, right? But it's these fanatics that are really the problem. It's not the thinkers, right? It's the fanatics. Now, and so I do think that is a worthwhile differentiation to make. Don't focus so much on the thinkers. The thinkers will find the destination eventually. Let's focus on the fanatics. But of course, it's really easy to say, oh, okay, well that's who the fanatics are. But that's not really, what's important. What's important is, what do they do? Right? Like, what is it? It's easy to say, oh yeah, some people are fanatics, but what makes them a fanatic? When you encounter these people, what is their modus operandi? Well, that brings us to number 2, and what I call boxing. And yes, that is boxing with 2 X's, not 1 X. We're not talking about, bang, bang, bang boxing. We're talking about a different kind of boxing here. So, let's say that there was a man, right? And this is just a normal bloke, an everyday fella, right? And you ask him, what are your political positions, Mr. Man? What is it that you believe? And he turns around and he says, well, immigration is out of control, right? He's a real close the borders right now kind of guy. He says feminism was a failure, right? He looks at the outcomes of where feminism has led women, where it's led men, and he's concluded, like, this was a disaster. It would have been better if we never tried this social experiment in the first place. He says abortion is murder, right? Probably for a religious reason, you could assume, but also perhaps not. But he's opposed to abortion. Okay, well, if you're a logical human being, right, you would look at what this man has said thus far, and you would say, yeah, this man is probably conservative, right? Because all the opinions that he's said thus far are all conservative opinions. Kind of a logical assumption to make, right? Not exactly rocket science. But here's the thing. Let's say that you had a conservative Red Ocean fanatic, right? And a progressive Red Ocean fanatic, and they came across the man, and they just heard the man say those 3 opinions, right? Now, they too would conclude that the man is a conservative, because who wouldn't? It's a completely logical assumption. But they would go a step further. What they would do is the fanatics would very quickly put the man inside the conservative box, right? Boxing. They box people, right? They put people in these tribal boxes of which they cannot get out of, and they may share that box with the man, or they might want to burn the box down, right? The point being that the fanatics, they view the world as putting people in boxes, and they're obsessed with this. They cannot think outside these boxes, right? So there's no, like, in a box, you're either in the box or you're out the box. You can't be 50-50 in the box and 50-50 out the box. Well, I suppose you can, but that's not how they think about it. They can't. In other words, they can't fathom thinking outside the box. Everyone is in a box, and these boxes, of course, are the Red Ocean ideologies, right? So one of the boxes is the conservative box. Well, this man, because he has said conservative beliefs, he's in the conservative box. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the conservative fanatics will treat him with a newfound, unusually unearned adoration, right? So they will be like, oh, brother, you're a conservative too? You're in the same box as me. Hey, pal, you're my best friend. If those progressives give you any trouble, give me a call. You're on the team. Basically, they'll sort of. If a conservative fanatic identifies that someone is a conservative, they automatically treat them as a friend, even if they don't know their name. They don't know their name. They don't know anything about them. As long as they're in the same box, they're in the same tribe. They're in the family. You're with me. You're an ally. You're a friend. I love you, right? That's what these people are like. And we've all kind of, I'm sure all of us watching have experienced this, right? Like you've come across a fanatic, and you share. It just so happens that you share some of their ideas, and they just start worshipping you almost. They're just like, oh my God, you're an amazing guy. Hey, you're my best friend. Hey, buddy, give me a bro fist. All this sort of nonsense. But meanwhile, on the opposite side of the coin, the progressive fanatics often do the opposite, giving him a newfound, unusually unearned scorn, right? So if you come across a fanatic and you disagree with them, or they disagree with you, they put you in a box, which is their rival tribe. They despise you. Like, these people will call for your death. They will want you burned at the stake. They'll want you silenced. They'll want you removed from the face of the earth. Because as far as, it doesn't matter if they don't know your name, your life story, anything about you whatsoever. All it takes is for them to know 3 political opinions, even just 1 political opinion would be enough. If you disagree with them and you're an enemy, you're in the enemy's box, and they despise you. They utterly despise you, right? So this is boxing. It's adoration and hatred. But let's say that the man, he had another opinion, right? He's not done yet. He's got one more opinion to say. And that opinion is, climate change is real. Oh my God. Well, that's not a conservative opinion, generally speaking. That's quite a progressive opinion, right? And so what you would conclude now is, oh, this man is a blue ocean thinker, right? He has syncretic thought. He has conservative opinions, many of them, but he also has a progressive opinion. Now, that's important because the fact that he has a rather progressive opinion that goes against the conservative status quo shows that he is capable of free thought. He is capable of taking each factor of an idea and accepting some and rejecting others. So he's obviously not in the red ocean. So he is a blue ocean thinker by definition. And so most people would just accept that, right? Most people would say, okay, yeah, he's a blue ocean thinker. He has a lot of conservative ideas, but hey, he also is capable of some other ideas as well. He's a blue ocean thinker. But there's a problem here, you see. And the problem is that the fanatics cannot comprehend blue ocean thought. Only their narrow red ocean political boxes of friend or foe, right? It's as I said earlier, you're either in the box or you're out the box, right? They cannot comprehend thoughts outside of these boxes, outside of this sort of worldview of, I have my tribe, we live in this box, and all those people in those other boxes, they're our enemies. And they think that they know everything about the enemies in the boxes. It's almost like straw men. And they think that they know everything about the people in their box. The idea that a man would oppose immigration, feminism, and hold other conservative beliefs, and also believe in climate change, that's incomprehensible to all fanatics. It's incomprehensible. It's simply, they blue screen of death. They crash. They can't comprehend that. And so, thus, the conservative fanatics will feel as if they've been deceived, plunging the man into the progressive box. And that's a really important point. The conservative fanatics will adore you if you believe in all the conservative beliefs, the mantras of whatever the conservative tribe in the box believes. As soon as you deviate away from that, and it becomes clear that you're not like them, you're not a conservative fanatic, you're not in the hive mind, you were able to have your own thoughts and disagree and break away from the tribe, they don't go, so you agree with me 90% and you just disagree with me 10%, oh, that's fine. No, they won't do that. Red Ocean thinkers might do that. Red Ocean fanatics won't do that. What they'll do is they'll feel betrayed. They'll feel like you've lied to them, you've deceived them. They'll say, no, I thought you were a conservative, and now you're saying you believe in climate change. Well, you lied to me then. I'm here thinking you're my friend. You're not my friend. You're a progressive. That's the thing that's so interesting about fanatics. If you disagree with them, sincerely disagree with them, even just 1%, you will automatically be plunged into the rival ideology's box, right? And you might plead, well, hang on, but I agree with you on immigration, I agree with you on this, I agree with you on that. They'll say, no, you don't. No, you don't. You're saying that to deceive me. You're some agent provocateur. You're really a progressive who you only said those conservative things to try to woo me, to try to bring me over to your progressive side. That's what you're trying to do. You're an undercover agent. You're no friend of mine. You're an enemy, right? So the fanatics who used to agree with you, they now despise you. But it's not like it's any better on the other side of the coin, because meanwhile, the progressive fanatics remain repulsed at the man's other beliefs, keeping him in the conservative box. So the progressives, just because you say, I believe in climate change, they'll say, no, you don't. No, you don't believe it. You don't believe in climate change. You're a Nazi, right? You're Hitler. You oppose immigration. You oppose feminism. I've heard your conservative beliefs. I know what you believe. We see right through you. Right, Mr. Man, don't try and worm your way into our progressive movement by saying that you believe in climate change. We know that you're not a real progressive. You're a conservative. You're an agent provocateur. Right? So that you're in this ironic situation now where ultimately both Red Ocean fanatics view the Blue Ocean thinker as the exact same as their ideological rivals, right? The conservative fanatic now thinks that the Blue Ocean thinker is a progressive, and so they move him from the conservative box into the progressive box. Whereas the progressive fanatic still believes that he is an absolute conservative, and so they keep him in the box, right? So in other words, fanatics of all calibers despise Blue Ocean thinkers. They always think that Blue Ocean thinkers, people who deviate even slightly from their thought process, even slightly from their tribe, their ideology, is the same thing as the fanatics that they oppose. It's the exact same thing. And by the way, this example, it works with any ideology. You know, you could have a man who had 3 progressive ideas and 1 conservative idea, and the conservatives would reject him for the 1 progressive idea, and the progressives would reject him for the, do you know what I mean? Like this example, it could be you could use any ideology, any set of beliefs. It's the exact same thing. The point being is that fanatics despise all Blue Ocean thinkers, all of them. And so that's what boxing is. Boxing is categorizing everyone outright as either friend or foe, with no in between, leading to radical misjudgments. And I feel like every single one of us, whether online, usually online, but perhaps also in reality, have been boxed at some point in our lives if you are a Blue Ocean thinker. And you have been treated with suspicion, with negativity. You've been treated almost as if you're pure evil. But most importantly, and this is what separates, again, Red Ocean thinkers from Red Ocean fanatics, they won't listen to you, right? A Red Ocean thinker will comprehend a Blue Ocean thought in time. They might be a little bit confused by it, like, how can you be a conservative who believes in climate change? How can you be a progressive who is against immigration, right? They'll scratch their heads and go, I didn't know that was possible, right? And then a light bulb appears, and then they start to think about it. But fanatics will not do that, right? They won't listen to you. They will assume, they'll put you in the box, and when you're in the box, they assume that they know everything about you. Oh, you're a progressive? I know everything about you. You're a conservative? I know everything about you. Right? There's no nuance. There's no like, let's think about this a little bit. No, this doesn't exist. And I'd like to give an almost perfect example of boxing that I experienced recently. And this is really just an unbelievable example. So recently I made a lecture called Harsh Truths for Conservatives on Homosexuality. You might have seen it, you might not have. But the TLDR of it, and it's very hard to summarise because it's very complex, is that conservatives, whatever your political beliefs or religious beliefs are wasting too much political capital talking about homosexuality as opposed to talking about a myriad of other much more prominent issues that are affecting the heterosexual majority. Right, that's just one side of it. There's many other parts of it. Now, I always like reading comments, and I received an absolutely fascinating comment on this lecture. And I'm not going to read the exact comment, but I'll read a summarised version. It said this. It was by a conservative fanatic gentleman. He says, "As a long-time viewer, I am disappointed at your attempt to use religion to defend homosexuality. A brief Google search would show you very clearly that the Bible doesn't approve of such behaviour. See Leviticus 18:22 or Romans 1:26-27 and see for yourself. Anyway, that's just my thoughts and I'm sticking with them." Now, if you're a conservative person and you read this comment, your natural reaction will be, yeah, I agree with him. Alex, how dare you try to use religion to defend homosexuality? What's wrong with you? I agree with this guy. Thumbs up to this guy who made this comment. How dare you? What are you thinking? Meanwhile, those of you who have watched the lecture will be scratching your heads in bemusement and utter confusion at such a comment, because of course you will know that in the lecture, I mention these exact quotes. The exact quotes, the biblical quotes, the Torah quotes on this issue, I mention them directly, and not in section 5 or section 4 or later on, in section 1, the first section. And not only that, but I didn't try to use religion to defend homosexuality. In fact, why would I do that? When you're making a lecture aimed at a conservative audience who is naturally going to be much more religious, you can't use you can't use the progressive playbook. You can't talk to these people like you're talking to a progressive. No, you have to talk to them like they're conservatives. Because that's who you're talking to. And you have to incorporate religion into the point you're trying to make so that it's absorbable and compatible with their worldview, right? I mean, that's just so obvious. And so why is he saying that I, used religion to defend homosexuality? And why is he saying that I should check out these Bible quotes when they're in the lecture that he's commenting on? Right? How does this happen? I can tell you exactly how it happens. It's boxing. So there's multiple steps to boxing, but what happened here is, firstly, you can assume that this gentleman is a subscriber and is a viewer, a long-time viewer. Ironically, doesn't view for very long, but I digress. Because I hold a lot of socially conservative beliefs. And I often talk about these socially conservative beliefs at the detriment of progressives. And so I imagine that this person has come across me. He's gone, hey, that's my guy. I'm subscribing. I'm, hey, Alex, I really like your thoughts, blah, 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 right? So they think that they've put me in the conservative box. I'm a friend. I'm an ally or whatever, right? But then what's happened is they see this. They see, hang on, a challenge to conservatives. Well, why would you want to challenge conservatives? Aren't you a conservative? Aren't you on the team? Aren't you one of us? Why would you want to challenge conservatism? No, you don't want to challenge conservatism. You want to challenge progressives. How dare you challenge conservatives? And then comes the inevitable, all right, no, you're not a conservative. Because if you're challenging conservatism, then you're a progressive. So I'm now removed from the conservative box. I'm now plonked in the progressive box. Okay, I'm a progressive now in this person's eyes. Then what they do is they go, right, let's consult the progressive playbook. How do progressives defend homosexuality? Which clearly, he assumes that this obviously must be what I'm trying to do, right? Well, he consults the progressive playbook and goes, right, what they do is they try to bend religion, specifically Christianity, and they try to weaponize Christianity against conservatives and say, Jesus means love, and Christianity is all about loving people and being friendly, and if you dislike homosexuality, then Jesus is going to be disappointed in you, right? So that's what he's concluded. Keep in mind, he's obviously not watched the lecture, not even section 1. He's not giving me the opportunity to hear my case. Fanatics can't do that. And so what they do is they say, right, that's what he's going to do. He is going to defend homosexuality just as progressives do, by bending and twisting religion to do that. And so then comes the comment, I can't believe that you would use, you need to read the Bible, blah, 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 blah. Right? Which then leaves me and other blue ocean thinkers thinking, I mean, did you even watch? Like, how could you possibly come to that conclusion? How could you tell me to read these quotes when they're in the lecture, right? And this is the point. As a blue ocean thinker, you will come across fanatics like this, and they will. I said in my lecture about caveman conservatives, which is a different. You could say that they are fanatical in a way, but it's a different phenomenon. I said that they write, but they do not read. They speak, but they do not hear. They think they know everything, but they know nothing. It's the exact same thing here. The fanatic, when they've put you in the box, in this case, I'm in the progressive box, they think they know everything about you. They think they know what you're going to say. They think they know why you're saying it. They think that they know you, like, period. And there's no point listening to you anymore. There's no point, having a discussion or a communication. There's no point. You've been boxed. They know everything about you, and that's the end of the story. And it leads to these ridiculous scenarios where you have someone telling you to read the Bible, specifically these exact quotes in the Bible, on the lecture that mentions these quotes. It leads to this sort of this hypocrisy, this arrogance, this egotism that is just beyond comprehension. And it leaves you confused, but it can also leave you angry, or it can leave you sad. In my circumstance, it just baffles me. I just think I cannot believe that there are people out there that are so fanatical that they box people in this way. They click on something. It's not like I have a gun to their head and I've said, hey, you've got to watch this right now. No, they've gone out of their way to click on this. They have refused to watch it, but they will leave a comment telling me what I should do when they haven't even bothered to watch the thing. This is the modus operandi of fanatics. And it's so annoying. And this is just an example of what it's like to encounter fanatics on YouTube or on the internet. But God, there's loads of examples that you could give in day-to-day life, in reality, for you, in whatever with whatever you do. And so, but here's the thing. Red Ocean Fanatics, when alone, are at most a nuisance, right? They spread frustration due to being impossible to negotiate with, as we've seen, because they don't listen to you. You can't speak to them because they won't even listen to you. They promote their outrageously ignorant miscalculations with supreme confidence everywhere, right, as we've just seen, right? Making comments despite not watching the thing that they have commented on, right? And they create huge amounts of drama and tension unnecessarily. Yeah, I mean, if you're friends with a Red Ocean fanatic, God forbid, or if you've got a family member who's a Red Ocean fanatic, which is becoming increasingly common, especially with the elderly, if you try to talk to them about anything political, they just write you off. Like, if you disagree with them on something, they won't hear out the evidence or the reasons why or the stats or whatever. They'll just write you off and say, well, no, you're evil. You're obviously one of them. You're the enemy or whatever. And when they've boxed you, they think they know everything about you, right? When they're on their own, they're at most a nuisance, right? The problem, however, is when they are allowed to congregate, they can prove very dangerous, right? Because they feel empowered in a mob, leading to violent riots. Have you ever watched a riot, like riot footage? Of course you have, I'm sure you have. Where you've got people like smashing in cars, breaking car windows, and like looting stores. And you think to yourself, and of course they're always covering their faces, and you think to yourself, these people would never act this way if it was just them on their own. But when people are in a group, and the group is being violent, and the group is smashing up things, it's almost like an animal instinct kicks in. It's like, and people just go, screw it, I'm going to do the same thing. It's almost like it gets the blood pumping. People do things in groups that they would never do in reality on their own, right? And this fanaticism enables that. And they can create criminal cells leading to horrific terrorism, assassinations, right? The kind of people who try to assassinate people based on their political beliefs in a democratic system where you can, contrary to popular belief, just vote people out. No, these are the kinds of people who want to try and kill people, or will try to blow up things and things like that. Not all of them, of course, but the most extreme, the most fanatical of fanatics, they do that. Of course they do. I mean, the 21st century has been defined, for the most part, by terrorism. It's like one of the key defining features of this century thus far has been terrorism. Whether it be assassinations or attempted assassinations or just, blowing things up, it's the defining feature of our time right now, in terms of politics, which is really sad. And they are, of course, vulnerable to manipulation by populist demagogues. If you have a charismatic person who can gather around a large group of people, a big movement, and they know how to play the fanatics like a musical instrument. They just go up on the stage with the podium and they start playing the musical instrument. The fanatics become hypnotized. It's almost like they give up their own brain. I call it the Hivemind because that's really what it's like. It's like they give up their mind and they sort of merge it together in this hive mind. And whatever the leader says, they will go along with it 100%. The leader could say, jump into a pool of lava and you'll go to heaven, and they'll do it. I mean, Heaven's Gate, right? That cult that or many other cults that they all die en masse voluntarily. That's a prime example of that. That's granted, that's more religious fanaticism than political fanaticism, but there's a huge overlap between the two. And when people fall into this trap, it's almost like I mean, it's a bit different, really, because I'm talking about political fanatics in the sense that they're a slave to an ideology. But actually, if you can get I actually think that people who are slaves to populist demagogues start off being a slave to an ideology, and then they can become a slave to the demagogue, to the ideologue, over time. As long as it goes on for it's almost like a level 2 in a way. It's like eventually the ideology comes second to the person preaching it, if that makes sense. Either way, you get the point. These people in a large groups are a massive, massive problem. Okay, so that leads us to the third question then, which is why are they like that? Right? I mean, that's a pretty good question. Why are they like that? It's easy to say, oh, there's fanatics and this is what they do, but where do these people come from, and why does there seem to be so many of them today? Right? I mean, there really does. I will say it feels like there's a lot more fanatics today in the early 21st century, and there are. But there was also a lot of fanatics in the 20th century as well. I mean, look at the Soviet Union, look at Nazi Germany, right? I mean, it's, this isn't really anything new. It's just more inescapable today because of the internet. But nevertheless, let's talk about the origins of fanaticism. People often like to simplistically credit one particular cause as being all-encompassing, but in truth, there's many differing reasons why people become Red Ocean fanatics. Yeah, I mean, it's important to not, again, as I said, tar everyone with the same brush, because otherwise you're doing the same thing in a way. You're boxing them in a way. It's like, oh, I already know everything about you. You're a fanatic, right? I know everything about you. No, there are many different reasons why people become fanatics. So I believe there's 6 main reasons, each with their own causes themselves, and let's go through them. The first reason would be politically induced trauma. Right, so this is where, like, have you ever spoken to a racial supremacist, whether it be a white supremacist or any other kind of supremacist? What I find often is that when you ask most people, why are racist people racist? Who are not racist, they will say, oh, it's because they hate people of other races, right? Which is a logical conclusion to come to. But that's not been my findings. My findings have been a lot of the people who are the most racist people on earth, as strange as this sounds, while they will insult people of other races, if you go under the surface, they don't actually seem to hate people of other races genuinely. As in, that's not the origin of their racism. The origin seems to be that they're scared of being treated badly themselves because of their race, right? Like if you talk to the vast majority of racist people of whatever race, and you ask them why did you become a racist in essence? That's what they'll tell you every single time. Usually they'll go on a tangent and a rant about like, oh, it's because these races are X, Y, and Z, and list a bunch of negative things, right? But if you scratch under the surface, what you'll find is that they don't want to be treated badly for their own race, and they've become racist as a sort of like, I'm going to be aggressive as a form of self-defense, right? It's almost like the young person who's a bully to prevent themselves from being bullied, right? It's almost like they're proving themselves beforehand so no one tries anything on them. Does that make sense? That's what I've often found anyway. Same thing with people who hate people because of their gender, right? Like men who hate women or women who hate men. Again, despite the fact that they spend a lot of time bad-mouthing men or bad-mouthing women, the origin of that hatred isn't actually genuine hatred of the other. It seems to be, again, a self-defense mechanism. It's almost like the men who hate women tend to hate women because they want a woman, right? And they're not satisfied. And the women who hate men are the same thing. They want a man, but they also fear men, and it's almost like men fear women for certain reasons, whether it be egotistical reasons, fear of adultery, whatever. Women fear men for violent reasons, trust reasons, whatever. But the origin isn't actually, and I know it sounds strange, but it isn't actually hatred of the other. It's a loving of the other that is sort of almost like malfunctioning. It's almost like a paranoia that then reverses into a form of self-defense hatred. Like I knew a guy who, whenever a woman would be around, he would treat them terribly. right? Like just rude by default. And I said to him, "What? Why the hell are you like this? Like, why are you so rude to literally every woman that you encounter?" And he gave a bogus reason, like, "Oh, they're all whores or whatever." But I realised that the real reason is because he doesn't want any of these women to get close to him, because he's scared of that attachment. And the reason why he's scared of that attachment is because he had negative experiences with women in the past where he got attached to them, they got attached to him, and then maybe things don't work out, and then he's heartbroken. And so now he just blocks out all women by default. It's almost like he makes himself purposely grotesque in terms of his attitude so that no woman wants him. Because if no woman wants you, then you can never be hurt. You can never be hurt by them. You can never, you can't have heartbreak if you never allowed yourself to fall in love in the first place. You see that with hardcore feminists as well, where they like make their armpits like a bush, and they'll make their hair really short or give themselves like a mohawk and make themselves really obese. And it's like they know that men don't find that attractive. And that's the point almost. It's like, yeah, you don't find it attractive. Now go away. Right? It's almost like a form of like aposemitism almost, if you know what I mean. But, that's what I find. I find that a lot of fanaticism, same thing with class, actually. That's worth mentioning. Like if you grew up poor, you're probably going to despise rich people because you feel insecure about the fact that you grew up poor and your family was poor. Meanwhile, if you're wealthy, you might despise poor people because you might feel subconsciously guilty for your wealth that you were born into. And so, or maybe you just see other people living in poverty. Meanwhile, you live a good life and it makes you feel subconsciously sad. And so you sort of go, well, I despise poor people because, they don't look out for themselves. Like if they spent more time, thinking and working hard like me, like us, then maybe they wouldn't be so poor, right? It's that kind of thing. It's almost like, again, do you understand the point I'm trying to make? It's like fanaticism that spawns around identity, and identity problems tend to link into ideologies, right? Sort of like how men who don't like women tend to go down conservative lines, and women who don't like men fall down progressive lines. And, same thing with race problems and class problems, right? Like certain sides, certain ideologies are more appealing depending on who you are for whatever reason. Like a lot of this is political, this trauma that is coming out in this fanaticism of a political ideology. Does that make sense? And I think that's one of the most common reasons why people become political fanatics. I mean, think about it. Fanaticism is not based on thought, it's based on feeling. Trauma is a feeling. Of course, there's some logic behind it as well, but it's a feeling, and it's deeply ingrained. And so I think that if you were the victim of racism yourself, you're more likely to be racist. If you were a victim of sexism yourself, you're more likely to be sexist. If you feel uncomfortable about your class, you're going to be more likely to be classist, right? But again, this trauma, it's induced politically. Does that make sense? I think that's one of the most common reasons, and I'm surprised that's not a more well-known fact. Of course, another reason is just plain old big-headedness, right? I mean, there really are a lot of people who grow up in families, they don't read, right? They never read. Their parents didn't try to educate them properly. They messed around when they were in school. All they do is scroll social media all day and eat Big Macs. And, there's a lot of people who just, they grew up in a culture that was just anti-intellectual. And it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like if you're an expert in something, you underestimate how much you know about it because you understand the gravity of the depth of the topic that you're an expert in. So you feel like you don't know anything about it. Meanwhile, if you don't know anything about something, you think that you know everything because you can't even comprehend just how far this topic goes, right? And you know if you're dealing with someone who's got this sort of Dunning-Kruger big-headedness because they just yap and yap and yap and yap and yap, usually with huge amounts of confidence about topics that they have no idea about and haven't even tried to find anything about. A great example of this is like, economics is a really good example, right? Like you'll have people who say like, the reason why people are so poor today is because the government doesn't give out enough money to people or something like that. But then you'll say like, well, hang on, that's a bit, elementary, isn't it? Like, what are you saying the government should print money? Or are you saying that the government should tax people more and then redistribute the wealth that way? Like, what are you, like, basically, like, that's what someone with basic economics knowledge would say. Like, hang on, well, where's the money going to come from then, right? Like, what's your logic here? What do you mean? But these people will just go, no, look, listen, pal. Like, the reason why people are poor is because the government doesn't give people enough money, okay? And it's like, well, no, what do you mean, okay? Like, what do you mean? No, you're going to have to, where does the money come from? Like, what are you asking? What are you saying here? Right? It's like they view everything so simplistically and they're so confident. It's like, no, this is why this is happening. But and then you scratch beyond the surface and there's nothing there. It's just like double down. It's like, you always know whether you're dealing with someone who's big-headed if they just double down, right? Like they state a stupid opinion and then you say like, well, explain that, and they'll just say it again, right? They'll just say it again. And it's just like, right, there's nothing going on in there, is there? Like, you've got a big head and nothing's going on in there. Again, this spawns from a foul upbringing, in my opinion. Just people who just don't read, lack critical thinking skills, were never punished for having a lack of curiosity, were rewarded for ignorance. So common in the Western world, coming across these people. And I have to say, and I'm not ashamed to say this, unfortunately, these people do tend to come from working class or underclass backgrounds. It's just true. It's unfortunately just true. The next type would be, of course, echo chambers, right? I mean, a classic. On the internet, social media, you have algorithms. These algorithms are tailored to keep you on the website as long as possible. And so they very quickly learn what you look at, what you don't look at. And they tailor the algorithm slowly over time to show you things that are basically irresistible to you for whatever reason. It's almost like having your own, having a drug that has been tailor-made to be as addictive as possible to you and only you, right? And so the problem is, however, that the side effect of this is that if you're only shown things that you like, or things that you don't like, but from an angle from someone that you do like, right? So like, if you're a progressive will be complaining about a conservative, right? So it's rage bait, but it's rage bait from a source that you agree with, if that makes sense. Well, then all algorithms become echo chambers, right? Because naturally disagreement, having a new idea is uncomfortable. People don't like it. People don't like to be introduced to new ideas and alternative opinions. It annoys them. And so, of course, the algorithms aren't going to tailor, aren't going to show you things that make you feel uncomfortable. They want to make you as comfortable as possible to maximize, squeeze as much ad revenue out of your eyeballs, right? And so what this results in is everyone's algorithms being an echo chamber where alternative views are not even bothered to be pushed because you're not going to look at them anyway. So, in other words, when the algorithm has made their mind up about you, you're in an echo chamber. When you're in an echo chamber, naturally, there's no alternative views, and so you almost become a fanatic but without even trying, because you're in this reality distortion field where certain events are minimized, certain events are maximized, and you don't even you just assume that this is an accurate representation of reality when it isn't, right? Very few people have the intelligence to, when they're scrolling social media, to go, yeah, I know what the algorithm's trying to do. I know who it thinks I am. I know what it's trying to introduce me to here. Like it's very few people can realize, like, yeah, I'm being played here. Like, it's just showing me what I want to hear, right? You see this a lot, by the way, with political fanatics, where like they support a political party that the polls say it has like 5% support or whatever, but they're absolutely certain that the pollsters are just lying. And they say like, oh, when come the election, our party will get like 60% of the vote. And then the election happens and their party gets 5% of the vote, exactly like the pollsters said. And then they go, well, the election was false, right? It's like they can't believe that they can't believe that you live in an echo chamber. Like, it's the images and videos that are being presented to you is not an accurate representation of reality. They can't comprehend that. Another reason is existential dread. Right, this is an underrated one, I think. Being a Red Ocean fanatic must feel great in a way because you have an answer for everything. Right, you have an answer before the question's even been posed. If you fully believe in an ideology and you think that if only everyone just absorbed this ideology and got with me and got with the program, then everything would be hunky-dory. We'd live in a utopia, right? Like, that sort of makes it sort of eliminates any form of existential dread that you might have because you have all the answers. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember being about 5 years old, and I was stood in my room, my bedroom, on my own, and I was looking at my hands, staring at my hands, watching my fingers move, and I said to myself, "Oh my God, I'm alive! I'm alive!" And did anyone else do this when they were really young? And then you start to like think about how big the solar system is and how big the universe is, and you start to think like, what is humanity? What am I? I'm a human being. What does that mean? What am I doing here? What's going on? And then you start to feel like this dread because it's like trying to imagine a new color. You know, your brain just zaps and goes, nope, not possible. Stop trying to do that. You know, or think of the largest number possible. And there's always a number larger than it, right? Even a Google, you can add a 1 at the end of it, right? And so your brain zaps and goes, nope, stop trying to do that. Your mind cannot comprehend the questions that you're trying to ask. And so, you know, as a young person, you can end up having this sort of existential dread where you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I am. I'm a human being. What does that mean? Where am I? You know, what is the meaning of life, right? And I imagine that, you know, that gets a lot of people down, right? And religion can help with that. In fact, it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are religious. It's a lot of the reasons why people are religious fanatics. But if you're a fanatic, it's great because it counters dread. It counters existential dread. You have an answer to everything, even if you don't actually have the answer. You fool yourself into thinking that you do have an answer. And so you avoid that dread. You have certainty. You have confidence. Yes, I have the answers. I know everything, you know. So it's almost like a sort of antidepressant, but for existential dread fanaticism. It makes you feel good. And when other people are in on it as well, it just backs it up. It's like this positive reinforcement cycle, except, of course, ultimately it's a negative cycle because, well, you're a fanatic, right? You're not thinking. Fifth would be fragile identity. Yeah, so I used to know a progressive woman, and I'm talking a full-on progressive fanatic, right? And I obviously have a lot of socially conservative opinions, much more than I do progressive ones, despite the fact that I do have some progressive opinions, shocking as it may be. And I got to know this woman, and she was interrogating me on why on earth am I a conservative, and was, you know, calling me evil and a bad person and all this stuff. And and she couldn't have been that much of a fanatic because she did hear me out in a way. You know, she did hear to why I opposed abortion, let's say, or something like that. And what I noticed is over time she started to come around to the more conservative positions. But she said to me something that was absolutely mind-blowing. She said, Alex, even if you convinced me 100% on your conservative beliefs, to the point where I was no longer a progressive, I would still pretend to be a progressive. And I said, why on earth would you do that? Why would you pretend to believe in something that you don't believe in? And she said to me, and this is something I never thought of before. She said, because she's been a progressive all her life. She's a member of a progressive political party. She has campaigned for this progressive political party. All her friends are progressive, right? And being a progressive, it's almost like a part of her now that she cannot remove, to the point where if she tried to remove it, it would feel like as if she's betraying not just everyone she knows, but also herself. As if she was so scared of evolving in terms of thought that she would rather cling on to the things that she no longer even really believes just to keep her identity intact. And so I never even thought that was a possibility, right? This is like the antithesis of blue ocean thought. But apparently, you know, apparently this is the case with a lot of people. And I never thought like that was possible. And so it makes me think that a lot of people who are fanatics, they might not even believe the things that come out of their mouths. It might just be because of some sort of psychological personality problem that they need to cling on to these beliefs, because otherwise they don't know who they are. And maybe absorbing new ideas I don't know, they feel like they can't stand up on them, even if it's what they believe. It's absolutely mind-blowing, but, it's a thought. And lastly, I would say, of course, just classic mental illness, right? I mean, if you come across someone who's schizophrenic and they think that they're being surveilled by intelligence agencies, even though there's absolutely no reason for them to be surveilled whatsoever, or they think that there's like a CIA agent living in their walls listening to them or something, like they're hyper paranoid, they're hyper schizophrenic. Well, of course they're going to be a fanatic, because they're not comprehending the world as it is, right? They're comprehending a sort of illusion. They're living a lie. They're living in a sort of delusional world where the world is against them. Like a lot of people who believe like the world is ran by lizards, or like an Illuminati, like cavemen conservatives in a way. These people tend to be very mentally ill. It's not that they're low intelligence necessarily. It's that they're mentally ill. Like that, they're very, very. They don't see the world for how it is. Their perception is damaged in a way, right? It's like you can't make fun of someone who's deaf for not being able to hear music. You can't go to a deaf person and say, "Really, you can't hear? Pfft, take a look at a lot of this guy." No. What are they meant to do? They can't help it, right? And it's the same kind of thing with this. It's like, for some people, they can't help being fanatics because the very foundations of their perception is flawed. Like, they're not, they are, it's almost like they might not even be capable of seeing reality for how it is. And even if you show them that reality, they won't believe it. And I think that we do underestimate a lot in the Western world how much mental illness plays a part into a lot of people's fanaticisms. I mean, we really should not underestimate that. And I would also say, hardcore loneliness, you could say, is a form of... It's not mental illness. I mean, loneliness is totally normal because humans are tribal creatures. But if you have a mentally ill society that is atomized and individualistic and doesn't prioritize family or friendly bonds or religious bonds, so everyone's atomized, you have a mentally ill society. People are going to become political fanatics to get a sense of tribe in a way as well. So it's not just that the individuals might be mentally ill to the point where their perceptions are flawed. It might be the society is mentally ill to the point where people embrace fanaticism simply to give themselves some group to be a part of, right? Either way, until these reasons are individually minimized, we can only expect Red Ocean Fanatics to continue to become much more common. These reasons might not be all the reasons, by the way, but these are what I would say the main reasons, right? And again, every single one of these can be dealt with individually, and I think it's quite common sense how to deal with them, really. But when you have a sick society that doesn't just enable these sorts of behaviours, but actually promotes them, incentivizes them, we shouldn't exactly be surprised that we have a lot of people who become political fanatics. It's very obvious how to solve these issues. You have to have a much more heavy-handed, authoritarian state that puts people in line it harms freedom for harmony's sake, for the greater good of the society. Because we're not capable of doing that in the Western world, this is what we get, and we enjoy the fanaticism that spawns from it as a result. Which leads us to another question, which is a very potent one. Where will they lead us? Right? I mean, let's just assume that these origins of fanaticism are not dealt with, right? Like, people are not educated properly and aren't taught not to be big-headed, or given their mental illnesses aren't solved or whatever, right? Where is this going to lead us in the future? Where are these fanatics congregating and editing society? Where is it going to lead us? Well, that leads us on to number 4. A cyberpunk dystopia. Yeah, I told you we would explain why I'm blue. So, governments and corporations are constantly engaged in a tug of influence against each other. Right? I mean, if you're in the private sector, what is the number one thing that you roll your eyes at? Red tape, right? The European Union has made a new regulation, blah, 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 right? It's like, oh God, not another regulation. or tax, or not more taxes, or not more regulations, not more red tape. Will you just go away and let me do my business and make my money, please? Right? That's what you think in the private sector. But of course, the public sector has to exist. There has to be some limits to corporate power. There has to be some taxes. There has to be some public services. There has to be some law and order, right? And so governments and corporations, really, they work hand in hand, right? They need each other. If there's no government, you can't really have a corporation. If there's no corporation, well, the government isn't really going to have much wealth to spend, right? So, but that doesn't change the fact that despite the fact that they really need each other, they also work against each other. As I said, they're in a tug of war, right? And where this balance of influence is skewed differs from country to country, right? Depending on where you are in the world. For example, somewhere like China, for example, would be heavily leaning more on government than corporations, right? I mean, the Chinese government is exceptionally heavy-handed towards what goes on inside their country. They're very authoritarian. I've seen some people say totalitarian. I can understand that. But, many Southeast Asian countries are like this, Singapore, for example, to an extent. But China, I think, is the best example where if you're a Chinese CEO, you can be a billionaire. You don't go against the government, right? In China, they had this CEO called Jack Ma, I believe. I think he's the head of Alibaba, which is one of the billion-dollar companies. And he said something negative about the government. I can't remember what. It wasn't even that big of a deal either. And the government essentially took him out of business for a while. He disappeared for a while, and then he came back after like 2 months or something like that of disappearing. That's sort of how it works in China from what I've seen. It's like if you disagree with the government, they will sort you out very, very quickly, and they'll say, hey, you remember the party line, boyo, right? Like in China, it's very clear who's in charge. The government's in charge. The corporations are at the mercy of the government, and that's the end of the story. You do not get to go into China, in the private sector, especially as a foreigner, but even as a domestic citizen, and, start lecturing the government and saying this is what they should do, blah, 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 blah. You would be crushed instantly, right? You don't mess with them. Meanwhile, somewhere that would be the opposite, I'd say, would be the United States. In the United States, corporations basically run the place, right? I mean, there is a government, the US government, and it's a very powerful government, large military, etc., etc. But corporations are more than free to lobby the government, to create PACs, to gather capital together to influence policy making, something that is especially backfiring in the United States right now with their foreign policy blindness on Israel, for example. In America, money talks, right? I mean, the Americans sort of have a culture where if you don't have money, you're on your ass. And if you do have money, you get treated like a king. The Americans are obsessed with government keeping out of people's business, keep out of my speech, keep out of my defense. The Americans have a culture of like, I don't owe you anything, but you don't owe me anything. It's like just get away from me, basically. It's like this sort of obsession with small government, which it has its upsides and downsides. If you compare China, for example, China, I would say, has a much more collectively stable society and a much more educated people, I would say. But they also seem to lack creativity as well, because I think the government stymies a lot of creative juices. Whereas the United States is the opposite. Like the United States is like a madhouse. It's like a rave. The average American doesn't come across as very respectable. But they also have some of the largest corporations on earth because they have that freedom, that creative juice to experiment and do things that most other countries wouldn't tolerate. So, which one's better is up for debate. I'd say that the European Union is sort of in between, where it's like the European Union is arguably the worst of both worlds, right? Because the European Union is obsessed with regulation, as I alluded to earlier. They love to legislate industries out of existence and make it so impossible for small businesses to compete against, say, American companies that aren't levy to these legislations and so can grow and grow and grow and then expand into Europe. European firms, it's very rare that they expand into America because they're usually killed before they can start because they're strangled by red tape. But the European Union also doesn't really have any of the collective benefits that the Chinese do. Like in Europe, you can use TikTok, you can use OnlyFans, right? You can use all these terrible things that are clearly a detriment to the average person. So the European Union is like the worst of both worlds. It's like they have the negative freedoms of America with without the positive collective harmonies of the Chinese. Either way, you get the point, right? Like governments and corporations are in a tug of war. Some parts of the world are clearly, one side is more powerful than the other. In other parts, vice versa. And, in fiction, we often like to pontificate societies where such an imbalance of influence becomes comically clear. I don't really like to use fictional worlds to make real sociological points, but unfortunately it is a very easy thing to do, and it is a very popular and effective thing to do, I have found. But I don't like to do it. But either way, for example, a fiction where there's too much government would, of course, be something like 1984, right? A sort of one-party state controls everything in a totalitarian fashion, controls the news, controls history, controls the language, right? Can take words out of the dictionary and change things around. We've always been at war with East Asia, right? That sort of thing. So, and of course, I think everyone in the Western world, at least, is more than aware of that dystopia. In fact, people are too aware of it, in my opinion. I mean, if governments try to do anything in the Western world, people instantly scream 1984. It's like 1984. It's like, no, it's not. Like it isn't. But people in the Western world fear 1984, right? They don't want to live in a one-party state like that, even if it would actually be beneficial in many ways to do that. And of course, an example of the opposite would be cyberpunk, right? And that's where you basically don't even have a government, or you have a government, but it's like a skeleton crew. It's almost like a president in name only. Really, the corporations rule. You have like corporations that have more money than entire countries do, and they have their own private police forces and their own private healthcare, and it's the exact opposite sort of dystopia where government has almost no power. And, corporations have them all. And if you're part of a big corporation, great, you live a life of luxury. If you're not in a corporation, you're screwed. Basically, you have nothing. You're relying on a skeleton crew government that is useless, right? And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because in legitimate democracies, Red Ocean Fanatics often inadvertently move society over the long term closer to a cyberpunk dystopia simply by making good governance borderline impossible. Right, so people will say, hang on a minute, aren't Red Ocean Fanatics more likely to create a sort of 1984 dystopia? That's what people think in the Western world, like fanatics lead to 1984. Not really. It only through absolutely exceptional circumstances would Red Ocean Fanatics be able to usher in a society like 1984. The Weimar Republic, which gave birth to the Third Reich, for example, would be an example of that. But even that wasn't really a legitimate democracy in the end. You had like voter intimidation at the booths, and you had like endless sort of like violent groups like the brown shirts, steel helmets, the Red Army Guards, right? So to say that the Weimar Republic was a legitimate democracy is a bit of a lie. Especially near the end, by the end of it, the Parliament the Reichstag wasn't even used. People were just ruling by decree essentially, and so, I wouldn't even say that the Third Reich coming into existence, which you could say was sort of akin to a 1984 style society, in a way, I wouldn't even say that was through a legitimate democratic means. And of course, the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union, that came about by violent revolution, not really democracy. In fact, the Bolsheviks lost to the Mensheviks, if memory serves. Right, so they didn't even win power through democracy. But so yes, through revolutions and through very, very corrupt, intimidating, non-legitimate democracies, fanatics could usher in a 1984 style society. But in a legitimate democracy, right, in a democracy where there is no mass violence at the polls or whatever, where you have free movement of from one government to the other, the peaceful transfer of power. In a legitimate democracy, it's way more likely that you get a cyberpunk dystopia than a 1984 dystopia. And I think people in the Western world are completely blind to this form of dystopia. Let me explain why and how this happens. What you have is you have a carousel of incompetent governments, right? This is how you get a cyberpunk dystopia. So, for example, let's say that you had a government of neoliberal fanatics, right? And neoliberals, what are neoliberals good at? Well, I don't know. They're pretty good at foreign relations, let's say, for the most part, right? Like they're good at building global coalitions, but because they're so global looking, they're terrible on immigration. So if you have a neoliberal fanatical government, they'll just let in like millions of immigrants into your country. And it doesn't matter if it lowers the quality of life for the citizens already there. Like if you have a housing crisis, young people can't afford homes. It doesn't matter if like some of them commit crimes or there's culture clashes, incompatible cultures or religious clashes. Because if you have a neoliberal fanatic government, they don't care. Like they view all immigration as a good thing. Like, no, we're a global world. Borders are a bad thing. It doesn't make sense. And if you disagree, then you're a racist bigot or whatever, right? Okay, so what happens then? Well, inevitably, the public are going to turn against neoliberalism, and what are they going to elect? Well, they might elect a conservative government, a conservative fanatic government, right? To sort of teach the neoliberal fanatics a lesson. And so what they will do is they will do the opposite. They will say like, oh, I don't know, we're going to deal with immigration. So they start deporting people en masse or closing the borders. Okay, great, that's what the public want. And the neoliberals went too crazy with that, so that's a good thing. But then what they'll do is they'll mess up something like healthcare. You know what I mean? Like they'll mess it up. Like they just won't give it the proper attention that it deserves, and you end up with a healthcare system like the United States, for example, right? And so then what will happen is people will then elect socialist fanatics, right? And the socialist fanatics will go, hey, that healthcare system that those conservative fanatics introduced, forget that. We're going to have a universal healthcare system now. And so people go, yay, we love universal healthcare systems. But then what they'll do is, I don't know, they'll mess up, I don't know, like they'll mess up the economy or something, or something like that. And so then you'll have libertarian fanatics come in, and they'll go, we're going to fix the economy. These damn socialists, they raise taxes to like 90%. We're going to lower taxes to almost non-existent, right? We're going to so they'll fix the economy, right? They'll incentivize trade and blah 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 blah. But in the but they'll be ignorant to poverty, right? And so they'll say like, oh, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if you've got poor people. If you're poor, that's your fault. I don't owe you anything. The state doesn't owe you anything. Like, it's every man for himself. And so then you'll get a progressive government where it's like, they'll do the opposite, where it's like, oh, we need to look after the poor. We need to look after the homeless. Let's help the poor. Let's help the homeless, which is good, right? But then they'll be ignorant on foreign policy. They'll be like, we need to get rid of our nukes. Nukes are bad. Nukes are not good. We're going to, we need to like completely isolate ourselves from the world and stop getting involved in the world and just let, terrorists want to have nuclear weapons. Oh, we'll just let them do it because #equality or something. And then what happens? Well, the cycle repeats. Then you get a neoliberal fanatic government who will sort out the foreign policy, but then the cycle begins again, right? Now, obviously, in actuality, it's nowhere near this dramatic, right? But it is somewhat like this in the sense that if you look at a lot of dysfunctional democracies functional democracies, but they're functional in terms of the fact that they are working as intended. They are legitimate democracies, but they are dysfunctional in the sense that they don't produce good outcomes for the public. This is what it's like. Like, if you look at the UK, for example, the UK will elect, like, the Conservative Party, which is, like, fanatically neoliberal despite its name. And they'll import, loads of immigrants, etc. And then the public will turn to the Labour Party to reverse that. I don't know why they would think that the Labour Party would do that. Mostly as a sort of default response in a two-party state, like, one party failed, we'll go to the other party. That fails, so then they go to reform, and God knows what comes after reform. Same thing with the United States. The United States has like 5 years of hardcore Republicans, 5 years of hardcore Democrats, 5 years of hardcore Republicans, or 4 years, excuse me. And basically what I'm trying to say is this. When you have fanatical governments that are fanatical about these ideologies, they're not pragmatic in the slightest. What happens is you have constant short-term changes resulting in no long-term vision. You have institutions of the state slowly withering away, and those reliant on said institutions suffer or seek alternatives. In order for a democracy to be stable, contrary to popular belief, you can't change government every term. You can't go like, what, we're going to have a government that is fully dedicated to this ideology for 4 or 5 years, and then the next time it's a completely different ideology for 4 or 5 years. Because countries need you can't do everything in a term. You have to have plans that last generations almost, right? And if you're constantly just changing everything, like a new government gets in, reverses everything the other one did, the state has no direction. No one knows whether they're coming or going. What's the point of even doing anything if it's just going to change and everything's going to be turned on its head anyway, right? So there's no long-term vision. Over time, education collapses, the economy starts to collapse, the culture collapses, because there's no solidity. There's nothing that everyone can universally agree on. And then the ideas just revolve around that universal center, right? It's just like, we're over here, we're over here, we're over here, we're over here. How can the institutions of society possibly survive such constant schizophrenic changes? 5 years, 4 years, it might sound like a long time to be in government. That's a drop in the ocean in terms of, the lifespan of a state. That's nothing, really. You can't really do anything. You can do some things in a term, but there's no way you can fix a country in a term. If I was, let's say for the UK, if I was Prime Minister of the UK now, and they said to me, you've got 1 5-year term to fix the country, I'd say, I can't do it. Not with the powers at the Prime Minister's disposal now. I'd need a generation. You need to give me 25 years. Hell, 15 years, 15, 16, 17 years in government at minimum. You couldn't fix a country in 5 years unless you were really, really authoritarian or even totalitarian. But even then, you're not really fixing the country. You're just silencing the opposition to give it the illusion that you have fixed it, which isn't good. And of course, as it says, if you're reliant on the state, whether you're on welfare or you need them for healthcare or you work for the government or, I don't know, everyone needs the government for something, but some people need it more than others. Well, when you have a government that is constantly on a carousel of incompetent governments, what you notice is the government becomes, well, as the name implies, incompetent. And so you can no longer rely on them anymore. In the long term, what this means is, in the background, corporations consolidate and they fill the void that government left behind, right? Think about it. If you need the government for healthcare and the government can no longer provide that healthcare, then I have no idea what the hell's going on outside. It sounds like an alien's landed. I apologise. Maybe it's a cyberpunk coming into effect. But if you're poor and you rely on the government, then you're not going to get any healthcare anymore because you're reliant on a skeleton crew. But if you're rich, you're not going to stay with the government. You're going to turn to the private sector. And it's not just in healthcare, it's in everything. Private schools for your offspring. If the government is producing schools that fail because they're led by incompetent carousel governments, you're going to turn to the private sector. You're going to pay a tuition fee. You're going to say, you're not being taught by them. You're going to go to this institution instead. Same thing with everything. You'll just what happens when you have incompetent governments is that they leave a void behind, a void of competency. And corporations will, for those who can afford to pay, of course, because they're not a charitable organisation, unlike the government, you could say, they will fill that void for those who can afford it. And this creates this big gap, right? This results in an unfathomably massive gap between those in and out of such corporate spheres, capstoning cyberpunk. Right? If you have an incompetent government, it creates a void of healthcare, a void of anything, a void of quality of life generally. Those who can afford to pay the private sector to improve that void or to fill that void, people will do it. Those who can't afford that are left out. And so what you have, and of course, only a minority can afford to pay. And so what you have over time you have a small elite, right? Usually who are a part of these corporations who provide these services and goods, who are reaping all the benefits of society, and everyone else is on their arse. And it's just like, well, if you can't afford it, tough, you're on your own. And that is the cyberpunk dystopia. And when you have fanatics do this without realizing it, because at least fanatics in legitimate governments, because fanatics think that they have all the answers, and they don't, because they're ideologues, that they're unwilling to think outside of the cage that they've put on their head. And they come to power with such confidence. Like when they're in opposition, they give all these promises. We're going to do this, this, and this, and people believe in them, and then they vote for them. But then they come into office, and then it very quickly realises that utopia isn't coming. It's just a different flavour of dystopia. And again, in the background, this is what happens. The rich sort of go, okay, I can see where this is going. I'm going to consolidate. I'm going to, hey, let's work together, blah, blah, blah. And everyone else is on their arse. And it takes people by surprise. Like, when you ask people, do you know, like what a cyberpunk dystopia is, most people don't have a clue. When you explain it to them and you show them this and you think, do you think that with every year that goes by in the Western world, we are becoming closer and closer to this? Almost universal agreement, people will say, yeah, it's pretty obvious. Okay, well, if it's obvious, why do you not recognise the cause? And the cause is that governments are being hijacked all across the Western world by fanatics, whether it be neoliberal fanatics, or conservative populist fanatics. We don't have pragmatic governments that think outside the box, that don't have these ideological blinders where it's like, they won't tolerate wrongthink, right? We don't have governments that are capable of blue ocean thought and can, when they're faced with a problem, they don't think they have all the answers. They investigate, and then they implement they implement the answers based on their investigation, right? The way that fanatics work is that they have the policy regardless of the situation. Blue oceans, they look at the situation and that becomes the policy, right? The way that we do government now, we've got it the wrong way around, really. And this is clearly where it's going to. This is why I'm blue, by the way. This is why I'm in Cyberpunk 2077. Because it's not just that I'm in it, you're in it. We're all in it. We are becoming this society. It's becoming no longer a fiction because we are sacrificing, the competency of government, the competency of the state to fanatics. We just can't keep doing this anymore. And so, again, the root of all this is Red Ocean Fanatics being allowed to take over or have a large influence over the political realm. It is for this reason that they must be stopped, which leads us on to the last question. How can they be handled, right? So, okay, you might be in agreement. There's fanatics, they box people. We know why they're like this, and they're leading us into a cyberpunk dystopia. Well, what can we do about it, right? Because it feels quite, quite hopeless, really, doesn't it? It's like, man, this kind of sucks. Well, it isn't hopeless. This leads us to number 5, what I call the Blue Ocean Shield. So, while dealing with Red Ocean Fanatics often feels hopeless, they can in fact be mitigated by a 3-pronged approach that I call the Blue Ocean Shield. So, let's go into this sort of trinity. The first part is, first, you must be the madman, right? Which sounds like a very strange thing to say, be a madman, but actually makes sense. And in order to talk about this, I'd like to tell you a bit of a story. So I'm sure that we all know the woman on the right there, Margaret Thatcher, who some would call a fanatic herself. But I bet most people don't know the gentleman to her left there. And that is actually her husband, Dennis Thatcher. Dennis with one N, funnily enough. And Dennis Thatcher, I once heard a story from him that I genuinely think is one of the most hilarious stories I've ever heard in my life. And I think it's so perfect for demonstrating what I mean by be the madman. All right? So I'd like to tell you, if you don't mind, what I call the Dennis Thatcher story. Okay, so story goes like this. Margaret Thatcher's Prime Minister, and Dennis Thatcher at this time, he is sort of like the husband of the Prime Minister. He's almost like the first husband for you Americans watching. And Margaret Thatcher was the first woman to be the Prime Minister in the UK, and so he was obviously the first husband, if you would. So it's quite an unusual role, really. Anyway, Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives, was meant to. Dennis was out somewhere in the country, and Downing Street was meant to arrange a car to pick him up from out in the country and bring him back to Downing Street, right? Unfortunately, they messed up, right? I mean, this was in the 80s, right? And so communication wasn't as good as it, it's not like you could just get your iPhone out and say, hey, where are you? Downing Street messed up, basically, and they sent the car to the wrong place or something like that. Anyway, point is, he was stranded. And in order to get home, he needed to do what, normal members of the public do, which is to get a train, right? So Dennis Thatcher, he goes on this train, but he's looking around, and all the seats are filled with people, right? The train's packed. And obviously, he's not exactly the youngest man on earth, right? You don't want to be stood up with your back creaking on a train, right? So he needed a seat. Anyway, he looks around, and he comes across this compartment on the train, like a private compartment, and it says reserved for mental hospital, right? Now there's no one in it. There's no one in the reserved carriage. So he just thinks, oh well, there's no one here, even though it's reserved. I'll be a bit cheeky. I'll take a seat, right? So he goes in. He goes, this is pretty nice. I got my own private carriage, and the train starts moving. It does some stops. He's getting closer to Downing Street. He's thinking, pretty good, He's also kind of crossing his fingers, hoping that, no one comes in. Well, unfortunately, he reaches a stop, and all of a sudden, a bunch of men dressed in white, right, people from a mental hospital, come into the train, and one male nurse guiding them. And they all start coming into this carriage where Dennis is sat. And, first it's the patients who start sitting down next to him. And then, and then the nurse comes in. And the nurse has got a clipboard, and he sits down and he has to count all the patients to make sure that they're all accounted for, right? So he goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then he comes across Dennis, and he goes, who the hell are you, right? And Dennis says, I'm the husband of the Prime Minister. And the nurse goes, 5, 6, 7. He thinks he's one of them. He thinks he's one of the mental patients, right? And because who would think that he's telling the truth, right? That no, yeah, this guy is the husband of the Prime Minister, right? Like you just would never think that he was telling the truth. So the nurse genuinely thinks he's a mental patient, right? And I like this story because it unintentionally serves as a great metaphor for being a blue ocean thinker, because you have a destination to get to, but in order to get there, you're going to have to be surrounded by people who think you're insane, even if you're right? So, because Dennis put himself in this situation, he chose to sit down in that carriage, right? Even though he's now telling the truth, because of the situation he's put himself in, to get to his destination, people think he's crazy, right? Like people, because of course they do. Who's going to believe that? And I just think that's such a perfect story. Like it's just such a. When I heard this story, I thought, oh, I've got to tell people this because it's just so perfect, really. But that's the thing, right? Because when you are a blue ocean thinker, you think differently, and people, fanatics especially, but even just regular people, they don't quite understand that what you're saying can actually come into reality. Like you're not just talking nonsense. And for example, when I say things like we are going to implement artificial intelligence in healthcare and have robots do surgery on people and help cure cancer and predict illnesses years before they even happen. People will say like, that's crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like you've been playing too much. You've been watching too much Star Trek, lad. Or when I say we're going to gamify education and make it fun for young people and have AI tutors that support human teachers. And it's going to be pretty much universal that young people will be using artificial intelligence as their own private tutor. People say, you're out of your mind. That's not going to work. They're not going to do that. Like, that's blah, 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 blah. When you say, like, we're going to have a car-free city and an internet-free city, and it's going to be a controlled environment, almost, but only for people who want to live like that, to prove once and for all that many of these modern inventions have actually had it's actually been a bit of a mistake, and that we need alternative ways of living. People say absolute insanity. Like, you're not going to get rid of the car. You're not going to have a car-free city, an internet-free city. You're out of your mind. When I say things like the individualism that we have today, these mass accepted ideas that are just completely and utterly in universal agreement in the Western zeitgeist, feminism, the concept of even democracy, when I say that all these things are going to be questioned in the future, and we're going to do things differently, and it's actually going to be better than now, people say, take your meds, mate. Take your money. You think this guy's off his rocker a little bit. The point being is that as a blue ocean thinker, all the people in the Red Ocean, not just fanatics, but all the people in the Red Ocean, because fanatics won't even listen to you, really, but all the people in the Red Ocean are going to think you're absolutely crazy. Like, the things that you're talking about, because you've thought outside the box, all right, you're out of your mind. Like, it's just, there's this idea that the way things are today are how they're always going to be. And I always say to people, how can you look back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? The world's not the same as it was back then. So why do you think that the way we do things now is how things are going to be 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now? Like, surely you must comprehend the lunacy of what you're saying. But again, so many people, they have this status quo bias. And people in the Red Ocean are the worst for this. But they just don't believe that it's possible. Not only that, but I'd just like to say also that there is a difference between fanaticism and radicalism. Radicalism, being radical just means that you're doing something completely out of the normality, right? And fanatics tend to be radical. But blue ocean thinkers are also by definition radical because you're thinking outside the box. The difference between how blue ocean people are radical and how red ocean fanatics are radical is because fanatics may be radical, but they're also fanatical, right? So that they have this, as I said, they have a cage, they have these blinders. Like, yes, they may be radical in the sense that they make big changes, but these changes often are terrible changes in the long term because they haven't really thought things out, because they're incapable of seeing the big picture outside of their ideology. Like, there's this idea that fanatics are often criticize blue ocean thinkers and say, you just want things to stay as they are. And I think, no, blue ocean thinkers are by definition radical. We're just not fanatical, right? There's a difference between that. You can be radical and make radical changes that aren't fanatical, right? I'm not fanatical about my beliefs. I just think that they're going to I just think they're going to work, and I think that there's sufficient evidence for that. But I'm willing to have my mind changed, and if the evidence was presented in front of me that it wouldn't work, I would lose the ideas. But the point is that as a blue ocean thinker, you are going to have people who will constantly call you absolutely insane for what you're saying, that make you feel this small, like you're just totally out of your depth. And what I'm saying is that, remember that in an insane world, it's the sane man who is considered insane. So be the madman. A Croatian friend of mine said that a few days ago. In an insane world, the sane man is considered insane. It's such a great line, and it's true. If you're in a world where everyone's a fanatic, burying their head in the sand like moles, believing in these old, out-of-date ideologies, and you have a pragmatic approach, and you're looking at the world for how it is, and trying to see the world outside of these ideological boundaries, yeah, people are going to think you're crazy. Embrace it. Embrace the craziness. Embrace people thinking that you're out of your mind and you're bonkers or whatever, because it's the madmen that change things, that push humanity forward. So that's number one of the blue ocean shield. Number two is quite similar, but it is different. And that is, second, you must expect being disliked. This, I would say, is one of the hardest things for people to do. See, what you think will happen when you explain your blue ocean thinking originally, like when you first become a blue ocean thinker, is you think that you're going to go up to the Red Ocean, the people in the Red Ocean, even if you put the fanatics aside, and you're going to explain your blue ocean idea, and you're going to give them the evidence, you're going to give them the statistics, you're going to give them the facts, you're going to explain to them in excruciating detail why this idea that is in the blue ocean, it's not common, why this makes complete sense. You're going to do that, right? And you think that they're just going to, their jaw's going to drop to the ground, and they're going to go, oh, they're going to have a light bulb that appears over their head, and they're going to go, oh my God, thank you so much. I never thought of that before. This guy's so smart. Oh my God, you're a legend. That's what you think's going to happen, right? What is most likely to happen when you explain your blue ocean thinking is this, right? You're going to have people hounding you, calling you an idiot, calling you a fool, calling you a buffoon, saying that you don't know what you're talking about, right? I've said this before so many times, but I have to repeat it. People don't want to have their mind changed. They want to have you regurgitate the things that they already believe in a nicer fashion, right? That way, they can feel better about what they already believe. It's less effort, right? It's like that woman I spoke about earlier, the progressive. It takes effort to admit that you're wrong and change. It takes no effort to listen to someone who just regurgitates everything that you already believe. In fact, it feels good. You feel less alone. And so you have to understand that if you're challenging orthodox beliefs, you're going to be disliked. You're going to be hated even, because people don't want to have their minds changed. They want to have their mind as it is now promoted, right? And so, you can see this if you just look throughout history. Humanity has a shocking track record of originally despising fresh perspectives, even if actually correct. I mean, for example, globe Earth. Right, took people today still don't believe that the Earth is a globe, but globe Earth was considered very controversial throughout history. Same thing with evolution. Right, you had creationism. You had people saying no, evolution's nonsense. It's actually, people still take Adam and Eve as factual. Let's say, and I don't mean factual as in respecting it in a religious sense. I mean they deny evolution is a thing. Or germ theory. This sounds crazy, but there was a lot of people who didn't believe germs existed originally. Even though it's so obvious to us today, if you met someone who didn't wash their hands, you'd be like, get away from me, right? But originally when germ theory came about, the idea that there was these little organisms that lived on our hands that were so small we couldn't see them, and they can make us sick, us, the big bad human, this little thing that big can make us sick, sounded hilarious to most people, right? But, it's true. And so this is why, hence, you must embrace being right over being liked, at least in the short term. If you want to be liked, if you want people to like you and say, oh, you're such a cool guy, be a fanatic. Your fellow fanatics will love you. The rival fanatics won't. But if you want to be liked, be a fanatic. If you want to be right, then you've got to be a blue ocean thinker. And in the end, people will like you in the long run, but even if they hate you in the short run, because you're right. People love people who are right in the end. But what I'm saying is, throughout history, people who are right were almost always hated, originally. Throughout history, that's the common trend. You have to be willing to accept that risk. Otherwise, there's no point being a blue ocean thinker. You might as well, do what the progressive woman does, pretend to be a fanatic, And so, as I said, in the long term, if you're right, red ocean thinkers will eventually be converted regardless. But meanwhile, red ocean fanatics will still cling on, even if they've been completely disproven. Yeah, that is a good point. It's the thinkers who through your resilience to the initial hatred will eventually listen to your arguments and be converted and join you, even if they criticize you to start with. The fanatics will never join you. The fanatics under no circumstances will admit that they are wrong. They will, but they have to reach absolute rock bottom before they change. It has to be like an absolute traumatic experience for them in order to change. But they will not change. It doesn't matter the facts. It doesn't matter the statistics. It doesn't matter the evidence. They will not change through their own volition. And it doesn't matter what you say, what you do, they will not change. There is no... I think, personally, to prioritize being liked over being right when when you have information at your disposal that everyone else is wrong about and you're right about, I think that is the biggest act of cowardly... I just think it's pathetic. I think you've got to have some resilience and say, listen, I don't care if you think I'm wrong. Here's my argument. Like it or lump it, right? Of course, There was an American writer who had this quote. I think it's a great quote. And he said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it." That is the Red Ocean fanatic, right? His salary, however, this isn't about money. Take this as a metaphor. It's about his sanity. Or whatever reason why he's a fanatic. These people need their fanaticism in order to feel fine. And your opinions or your facts, your uncomfortable facts, get in the way of that feeling. And they would rather destroy the facts, they would rather destroy reality as it is and create a fantasy if it means that they don't have to change. They want the world to essentially deny reality, to keep their fantasy in place, right? You're never going to convince people like that. Let's be honest, let's have some modesty here. Of course, it is also possible that you could be wrong. In fact, a lot of blue ocean thinkers are wrong. I mean, if you're thinking outside the box, well, the chances are that you probably are going to be wrong, because why isn't this in the box, right? Why hasn't someone thought of this before? So of course it's possible that you could be wrong. However, without such pioneers of thought, the world would forever be at a standstill, right? I mean, I'm not just saying be a hipster and think outside, just think things that are random, for the sake of being different, like some sort of hipster, like, oh yeah, be a blue ocean thinker for the sake of being a blue ocean thinker. I'm saying, if you think outside the box and you really think you're right, you've got to roll with it. You've got to roll with it, because you might be what is necessary to prevent the cyberpunk dystopia from coming into fruition, right? You might have the winning formula, as I believe with my Blue Ocean foundations. And so remember that all human progress spawned from unorthodox fresh thought, so expect being disliked. You have to be capable of being disliked. You have to have resilience. You have to have like a skin of steel, and understand that the reason why people dislike you is not necessarily personally, because they don't know you personally. They dislike you because you're challenging them, and they're fanatical. And fanatics don't like to be challenged. You've got to remember that. Which brings us on to number 3, lastly, and this is very, very important. And this is, you must find your people. Right? So, there's an argument to be made that there is such a thing as a blue ocean fanatic. And I don't mean fanatic in the sense that they're fanatical about their ideas, because by definition, if you're a blue ocean thinker, you have to be open-minded in order to be a blue ocean thinker in the first place, right? So I don't mean it like that, but I mean that there are some people in the blue ocean who love the smell of their own farts so much, right? They love the idea of being like, oh, I'm so esoteric, I'm so out there, I'm in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's how blue ocean I am. It's like no one can even compare to my ideas. I'm so out there that I'm not even in the zeitgeist at all, right? These are the people who sort of like the smell of their own farts. Like, they don't want to work with people in a way. They don't really want to make society better. They just want to look down on society. They want to look down on the people in the Red Ocean and feel superior and go, yes, Red Oceans. These are what you could say are blue ocean fanatics, right? People who, again, they're just in it for themselves as well, right? They're just in it to feel better than others. They're not really interested in making society better. Yeah, that's not good. Because the reality is that the truth is that while individuals can make a difference, real change only truly comes from groups of people, right? I mean, God, if you look at almost anything worth doing in the world has not just been one person doing it. I mean, by definition, because you inherit, even language you've inherited from other people and blah, 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 blah. Right? It's conch theory showing its face again, right? But almost anything great worth doing, whether creatively or whatever, especially politically, right? Because if you want to make a change democratically, really, you need political parties, and you need to get those parties elected, right? And almost all good changes come from groups of people. There's no point being a blue ocean thinker, and then you're the only one, and you don't even try to spread your beliefs at all. You don't try to get others in on it. You're not willing to work with others on it. At that point, you're just a blue ocean fanatic. Like, what's the point? All you're doing is just looking down on people and smelling your own farts. It's not good. You have to be willing to work with others. Otherwise, what's the point of anything? And in this slide here, I wasn't going to add this in, but I added it in last second. and I call this my Beatle without the Beatles feeling. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but I am obviously very, very dedicated to sociology and the study of society and trying to improve the political situation in the early 21st century and the rest of the 21st century, because I think that we're going down the wrong path. And I try my best to analyse society and conjure and identify the problems, but also conjure solutions to the problems. And, I mean, for God's sake, I go out of my way to give these talks and talk for hours on end and give these lectures and make all these things. So it's obvious that I'm quite passionate about this, right? About where we're going wrong and how to fix it. And obviously you must share that passion as well in order to be here watching this. I mean, otherwise, what the hell are you doing here? But a problem that I've had is that I've often felt like, one of my favourite bands is the Beatles. Well, not one of. My favourite band is the Beatles. I know, very cliche. And it's not just because, they make great music, which they do, and it's not just because they're from Liverpool, where I lived for many years, right? It's not just because they're northern, though it's part of that. One of the reasons is because I like the Beatles because I like the way that they all interacted with each other. Like, the Beatles are such individually talented musicians that every single one of them could have made it on their own, as they did. When they split apart, they all went off in their own direction, and they were all successful, but of course they were. But I think that each Beatle could have been successful without the Beatles, right? But that doesn't change the fact that when you put these four men together, they, it was like a sort of, it's so much better than them just being on their own, right? It's like, yes, the Beatles on their own are epic, but the Beatles together are legendary, right? It's like, yes, individuals who are very dedicated and very talented at what they do are great, but you introduce these individuals together, and it's like they're on a new level. And that's the thing with the Beatles. It's like I've known many people who have made bands, right? And the problem with a lot of bands is usually you've got one really good guy and then the rest are kind of crap, but they don't know anyone else, so they have to, they just go out, and the band fails because the one guy is carrying the rest. The thing with the Beatles, and this is what makes them so great, is that all four of them were unbelievably talented. And the chance of all four of these, like four unbelievably talented musicians being at the same place at the same time in the same band of this caliber is so rare. It's so unbelievable, which is why they were such a phenomenon, and I've often said that I always feel like a Beatle without the Beatles. Right, like I'm like not in musical terms, obviously, but in terms of like sociology and politics and blue ocean thought, like I am so unbelievably dedicated to it. Like I think about it when I get up in the morning. Like 2 minutes after I get up, I'm thinking about some problem or something. 2 minutes before I sleep, I'm thinking about it. Like I'm always researching, reading endlessly. Like, I'm so, you could ironically use the word fanatical, but not really. It's more just like obsessive almost, I really am. But I'm just one guy, and I'm limited in what I can do on my own. It's like, yeah, I can make these lectures and post them on the internet, but like, well, okay, so what, really, right? It's like, but if you had like two guys or three or four guys, like you had like the sociology Beatles, it would be unstoppable. It wouldn't just be, it wouldn't just be 4 times better. It would be like, they would almost like rub off on each other. God, that's a really unfortunate use of the term rub off. You know what I mean, right? It's like maybe you feel like this in whatever you do in life, right? Like it's like you might feel like a Beatle without the Beatles. It's like that you're pretty good, right? Like you're pretty good, or at least you're very dedicated if you're not good, right? But it would be even better if you were surrounded by other people who were like you, right? Whether you're a musician and you're on your own, you wish you had a band, or I don't know, like maybe you're a chef, you want to start a restaurant, you just can't find anyone else who's as dedicated as you. Like you're Marco Pierre White, where's your Gordon Ramsay, right? Like I always feel like this with sociology. Like I always meet people who I think, Yeah, they're in, like, people. The problem with sociology is people are interested in it, but they're not interested in it enough to take it really seriously. Like, it's like their life mission. It's more like a little hobby of theirs. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Anyway, what's for tea, love? It's like very few people live and breathe it. And I don't know. If there's one, I know this sounds sad, but I feel like I live in a dark timeline where I'm I'm like, where's the Beatles? Like, where's my Beatles? Like, where are they? Like, I'm just one dude. And maybe you know what I mean by that with what you do or in life. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe. But what I would say is this, regardless of what you think of their politics, the story of New Labour should serve as a blueprint for such unity, at least in terms of politics, right? So for those who don't know, in the 20th century, the British Labour Party was a basket case, right? Like, they barely won any elections. The Conservative Party, their rivals, won, like, basically every election. And, the reason why is because the Labour Party was sort of hijacked by hardcore socialists. They had a group called Militant Tendency, and they were like Antifa on crack, right? And they were obsessed with, like, the Labour Party. They were led by a guy called Michael, and they wrote this manifesto, and people called it the world's longest suicide note, right? Because it was just a terrible manifesto. Like, I think one of their policies was like, we're going to nationalize the top 100 companies in the country or something. So it's like they wanted to nationalize Marks and Spencer's. You know what I mean? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, they just had this very, like, old school Soviet view of the economy, like very centrally planned, controlled by trade unions, that it didn't really work in the late 20th century, especially like after the Soviet Union collapsed. It just didn't work. And what you had in the Labour Party is you had a bunch of modernisers, like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, pictured there, and many others. And they sort of said, look, I like the Labour Party because, unlike the Conservative Party, they care about the little guy. They care about society as a whole. They had progressive values, but they just didn't like the socialist aspect. And what they wanted, they essentially took over the Labour Party after a series of election losses and rebranded it New Labour. And they turned it from a socialist party into a neoliberal party. Now, neoliberalism back in the 1990s was blue ocean thought. And so they actually did the unthinkable in a way. They managed to take over, a red ocean fanatical party and turn it into a blue ocean party. Now, it didn't exactly work out very well because neoliberalism doesn't, it's not a very good idea, really. But that doesn't change the fact that if you take the politics away and view New Labour and how a small group of blue ocean thinkers managed to completely hijack a red ocean fanatical party, that's unbelievable skill, talent, and political manoeuvring. And I think that what has to happen is, I think you cannot create blue ocean political parties from scratch because it's too alien to the public, it's too unknown. I think what you have to do is take over from within already existing political parties that you somewhat agree with. It's not like you're just completely taking them over and you're completely different. Like, you agree with perhaps the basic premise, but you have to warp them into something completely different over a long period of time. Almost like a sort of transformation by 1,000 cuts, in a way. And I think that New Labour is a blueprint of that. And so when I say find your people, I'm not just saying that personally so that you don't, you don't lose your mind being lonely. I also mean that if you want to actually enact blue ocean political change, you have to find your people within, in my opinion, pre-established political parties, if that makes sense. And then go from there. A good example of this, actually, in the UK is Blue Labour. Within the British Labour Party, which is a very neoliberal party with a lot of loud progressives in it, there is a small group of sort of conservative socialists called Blue Labour. And they have about 5 MPs, which is quite a lot for a small fringe group. And they are much more, as I said, conservative socialists, so socially conservative but economically socialist. It's blue ocean. They're blue ocean. It's quite ironic they're called Blue Labour, but, they're blue ocean. That's the sort of thing that I mean. Like, if you could take that group and spread it outwards, make it bigger, and slowly over many years, the Labour Party would become Blue Labour, just as Blair and Brown turned Labour into New Labour. You'd have something there. Or maybe you could take, the Conservative Party would change into, do you know what I mean? I think that's what you have to do. But, remember that humans are tribal creatures, and being in the blue ocean, you're already going against the tide, so find your people. Even just for sanity's sake, you need to find, even if they're not your Beatles, even if they're not, totally on board with you, even just being around people who are capable of blue ocean thought is a good thing, because it drives you slightly less insane. I get comments all the time that say, in fact, this is the number one comment that I receive. I get people all the time that say, I don't agree with a lot of what you say, but I like to listen because I feel slightly less insane with because you're dealing with someone who is capable of thinking outside the box, and so are you, right? I always hear that. It's almost like, and I guess I don't know. I never know where to take it as a compliment. It's like, because you've basically said, yeah, I disagree with you, but I'll listen anyway. Is that a compliment? I don't know. I guess so. But I don't know. I do think that is necessary, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And I believe that, so that's the Blue Ocean Shield. And I believe that if you incorporate all of that, when you encounter these fanatics, and there's never usually just one of them, they usually come in groups. I think if you can hold those three things as a shield in front of them, inevitably the fanatics will cease to be a threat to you. And I think if this happened en masse, then the cyberpunk dystopia, which at the moment seems inevitable, will slowly dissipate, and we will actually have not a utopian future, because that's impossible, and every utopia always ends up being a dystopia, but we will have a better future than we otherwise would have had, if that makes sense. But and I know that so many people don't believe that. Like, so many people will say, like, oh, I feel hopeless. Oh, I feel like, I wake up in the morning and I read the news and I just think the world is dying or whatever. And it's like, listen, if you want to wallow in your own self-pity forever and wallow in helplessness and be cynical, that's up to you. But personally, I'm not doing that. If I'm going to be on this earth for many more years and hopefully many more decades to come, yeah, I at least want to, give try to make things a little bit better, as far as I see it. If you're just interested in, just being like that, just remove yourself from the situation in the sense, and just, I don't know, just distract yourself. Like, you're better off distracting yourself, being atomized, than you are spreading your pessimistic dysfunction to the world, which is such a plague on the internet, is it not? But yeah, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is surviving the Hivemind of Red Ocean Fanatics. Today we've gone through many things. We've learned the difference between Red Ocean thinkers and fanatics. We learned about the boxing phenomenon. We learned about the origins of fanaticism, the enabling of a cyberpunk dystopia, and of course, building a blue ocean shield. So I'm really curious with this one. What are your thoughts on this? I know it's very niche. I know it's very strange. But as a blue ocean thinker, I think these things are very important for you to keep in mind. And maybe this is another one of those ones where these are sort of things that you've had in the back of your mind subconsciously and have now been consciously put forwards. But I don't know. I don't think many people will have a lot to say on this, because admittedly it is a very, very niche topic. But for those of you who sort of feel hopeless about the current political situation, I think you might appreciate it. and again, the comment code for this one is the future. If your comment contains the phrase "the future," wherever, in whatever context, I'll know you made it this far, and I tip my my cyberpunk for non-existent fedora in your direction. All right, so on that note, folks, I really appreciate you watching as ever. Now, if you don't mind, I really, really need to turn off these blue fluorescent lights, because I feel like my eyes are about to explode. Because blue light is not very healthy for your eyes, believe it or not, and I am caked in it right now. So I think I'm going to give myself some red light therapy, to something like that. But nevertheless, as ever, it is a pleasure, and I'll see you next time.